Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by JV and Neil. I'm also joined by special guest Steve Crow, who's Strategy Director at Clarion Solicitors. Unfortunately, I have to start with an apology. We've only got one camera angle for this podcast. However, I'm sure you're still going to enjoy the interesting conversation. And with all that said, welcome to Tomorrow's Workplace Today. Welcome to the podcast, Steve Crow from Clarion Solicitors. So yeah, Steve, watchers, listeners, do you want to introduce yourself, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Steve Crow. I'm Strategy Director at Clarion, and I guess what does that role entail? It means kind of scanning the horizon, understanding market disruption, changes in the market, if you like, and understanding how that impacts us as an organisation, but also how it impacts sectors and our clients. And that change can be either a positive change or a negative change, but we like to be first to be spotting that and bring it to the attention of our clients. That's one of my key functions here at Clarion.
Excellent. Well, that leads me into my next question then. So what is going on in the world? When you're out speaking to clients, what are the kind of key trends that you're picking up on?
Crikey. I mean, I think in my 35-year plus career, I've never seen so much change in the economy, actually. And that change, as I said before, could be having positive or negative impact on business models. I guess it's just depending on what it is you do as an organisation. I guess if I track back over the last couple of years, we've had impact around supply chains with Brexit and COVID. The impact of things like the boat getting stuck in the Suez Canal.
Remember that.
They're saying it's still going to be years before everything gets back to where it needs to be. So, what has that done to organisations that are sourcing products and components from China? Then those lead times have gone from maybe 15 weeks to 60 weeks. So if you've got that critical component that's in your product and you can't get it, what do you do? So that's a big thing. So we're actually seeing some organisations having to redesign their products to design it for the products they can get or the components they can get rather than the ones they've historically used. So there's a big impact, I guess, in manufacturing. Are you
seeing people moving away from China, and where are they? If they are, where are they moving to? Are they bringing it back onshore or nearshore?
There's certainly a little bit of reshoring. Actually, there's a couple of dynamics there. We're seeing some north shoring. So actually, we're seeing businesses that are looking to get a cost reduction or better value. Is shifting stuff from London and the south up to regions like Yorkshire, and we've certainly benefited from that. We're working with a lot of London-based organisations that are looking for that cost efficiency, but we are starting to see some reshoring. Sometimes it's just to build a bit more resilience into the business model of organisations, kind of de-risk what they do, and also with the I'm sure you will have seen that sort of rising trend around ESG. If you're bringing components or whatever from the other side of the planet, it's the carbon footprint associated with that. So I think, again, we're seeing some organisation being attuned to that dynamic and thinking about reshoring.
Okay, so supply chain is one trend. What are the other? And you talked about the economy as well. Are you seeing increased amounts of, I guess, distressed firms given the current economy, or do you think that's still to come?
Yeah, I think, again, it really depends on the nature of your organisation. There's certainly, as an organisation that deals with the distressed side of the economy, so we're often supporting organisations with kind of turnarounds and actually, sadly, some administrations as well. So during the last 2 years, you might imagine that would be a very buoyant market, but actually it hasn't. It's been fairly quiet. So perhaps not as much distress as you might have thought, but we're certainly seeing an increase in the last couple of months. And as I guess when we get into 2023, combination of cost of living and energy costs, I think will be putting a huge pressure on certain segments of the market. So the kind of retail sector, you'll have seen a lot of distress around that. Hospitality and leisure, I think, would be another one. And then some aspects of manufacturing. So if you're a manufacturer that is making a low value component and you're using a lot of energy to make the product, then you're going to be quite exposed. Whereas if you're making a complex value adding product, you might still have high energy costs, but actually the energy costs in terms of the overall cost of the product, is you can just kind of wash that up if you like, and so those sort of manufacturers are still doing okay.
You mentioned earlier, Steve, about obviously regional in obviously Yorkshire, proud of Yorkshire, but companies from London are now starting to deal with you to move things north. You mentioned earlier about the fact that companies are distressed. How does Yorkshire region compare to other parts nationally? How are we doing? Are we seeing that we're less affected because cost of living may be slightly cheaper than down south? How's that comparing?
I get a very complex question. I think if I look at some aspects of the region, there is distress there. Actually, if you take say Leeds for example, I think it came out as the top tech city in the UK, and it's one of the fastest growing cities in the UK. So to some extent you're seeing maybe a pulling of Leeds almost pulling, I guess, from the rest of the region. But equally we see some world-class businesses here. I mean, I'm fortunate to kind of meet with a lot of businesses in my role, and you see some phenomenal businesses that are absolutely world-class in the emerging space satellite market. Who would have thought that Yorkshire would have probably 300-400 companies involved in satellite technology, making components that are actually on satellites? There's a phenomenal business over towards Huddersfield called Reliance that make the gearing system that unfold the solar array on satellites. In fact, I think it's the Rossetti satellite used their technology. So a world-class company here in Yorkshire. Other organisations using the data from satellites to underpin and enhance business models. So your ability to use satellites to measure very fine incremental measurements on the ground. So if you want to look at real-time flooding, you can do that with satellite technology. And I suspect increasingly we'll see organisations using to monitor real-time assets on the ground. So if you're a water utility, for example, wouldn't it be great if you can monitor all your moving components across all of your sites and use data analytics to work a potential fail, and to have ordered the component before it actually fails. So think about the cost efficiencies from that. We've got in the region a world-class cluster around health tech. Some amazing businesses, big and small, that are doing some cutting-edge stuff around health tech. Again, using data to solve problems in the healthcare sector.
What sort of, give me some examples of that, what are they doing when it comes to health tech?
So one of the things that in Bradford, they've got an initiative that's been running for decades called Born in Bradford. So they've been capturing data on hundreds of thousands of starting with kids, capturing information from when they're born all the way through to becoming adults. And if those people are prepared to give their data, then you can start to look at the issues around that. You can look at emerging health issues, health conditions. You can make a link between the impact of air pollution from traffic on Bradford to people's health, and looking. So they have actually made that link. That the closer you are to a polluted area, it impacts brain development as a young child. So one of the reasons, as I understand it, that Bradford has stuck to its guns in terms of congestion charging is because it's got the data to allow them to confirm that there's an issue there. So equally, there are businesses like EMIS and TPP who will be two of the largest GP patient medical record systems tech companies. They are able to look at data to look at geodemographic health conditions. So wouldn't it be great to be able to say, we know that a certain segment of society is likely to suffer from some sort of heart condition, and to have an early intervention. So I don't know the technicalities, but it might mean the difference from having a bypass operation that costs hundreds of thousands, in the NHS, to having a simple procedure if you capture it sort of maybe 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? So data, I think, can be a powerful force for good, I think, in health. But then, that whole digitisation, we see it, not just in healthcare, you see it in financial services. Again, this region's got one of the biggest financial services hub in the UK, second only to London. So we're seeing the emergence of fintech. You're seeing the emergence of edtech in education. So again, during COVID was a real catalyst to businesses like Twinkle that people might not have heard of a few years ago, employ probably 1,000 people now. So again, this digitisation of sectors, we see it equally in the manufacturing sector where you've got Industry 4.0. So I think where organisations are under pressure and they're looking to build resilience into their models, manufacturing is looking at capturing more data from their processes using sensors, maybe connected to Raspberry Pis, and then again looking at the patterns in the sand to say, well, where can we get a process efficiency by looking at all the data. I was at a business called Schneider Electric here in Leeds last week, who are one of the few companies that I've seen adopt Industry 4.0 all the way through their processes, so they can see exactly where they can get an incremental improvement. So for companies, I think that want to be resilient with kind of a challenging economy ahead of us, then they need to be looking at all of these different things as to how they can get those incremental improvements.
How does a manufacturing business get into a new sector like satellites? Do you have to be in it already, or is there an opportunity to, I guess, diversify your manufacturing organisation to get into those kind of growth areas?
I think typically a sensible organisation will look at its competencies, and it might have been, I can think of a business, I won't mention the name, but they've been exclusively associated with the civil aerospace market. With COVID, you imagine that sector literally was dead on its feet, so they had to very rapidly, I think the trendy word is pivot their business model. So what did they do? They went into the defence side of aerospace, which was still actually holding up, but then actually the skills that they had were broadly the skills you needed to go into making components for the satellite market, which is what they've done. So they've really heavily gone into that. So as a business, they've had some tough times, but they've come through it, and actually they're probably stronger for it. And then they've now got a slightly more diversified business. So if I'm a business looking about going into new markets, I think you've got to think, well, what are our core competencies? And is there an emerging market where we can apply those competencies? Maybe what you've got in your sector you fine honed, and actually there's another sector where your skills are appropriate, where they're a little bit sleepy, and you can go in and disrupt that market.
And how do you find those sectors? Because if you've always sold into this particular segment of the market, how do you even, I guess, broaden your horizon to find the new areas that are growing, which are difficult to find sometimes?
I guess going back to my original introduction, we as a firm will probably have 150 events a year, conferences, seminars, roundtables, and those are not about what we do as a law firm generally. They're about what's happening in the market. So we like to be the organisation that says, hey, look, here's something new. Come to a seminar, we'll get some great speakers, and you'll find out a little bit more about it. And maybe that change is a threat to your business model, and you very rapidly need to think, well, crikey, we need to do something about that, or actually it can be a real opportunity. So if I track back on some of the seminars that we've run over the last sort of decade or so, we were talking about kind of Bitcoin. Sort of 10 years ago, we were running events around 3D printing, where at that stage 10 years ago, it was making little polymer sort of components. And actually, I met an amazing business over towards Hull only a couple of months ago, who are printing in metal. And I don't know if you've seen a 3D metal printer. I suspect you have, because I think I saw one in your offices. But this additive ability to make, in an additive way, components. So this organisation 3D printed a stainless steel cube that if you or I were looking at it, you would not see any joins in it at all. They printed this in a way that you could push through a central component, and it suddenly became visible. It was zero tolerance printing. They also were able to 3D print something you just couldn't make on a CNC machine. So they make products, molds for BMW. So BMW have got various plastic components in the engine compartment of their cars, and so you imagine these plastic molds, these plastic components have to be put over a mold and then kept there. And then repeat it again, but the cycle time might be one plastic component made per minute. What this organisation did was to create almost like a worm cast just below the surface of the mould, which they were able to put cooling water through, which meant that the plastic components only had to be in contact with the mould for a matter of seconds. So you think about the impact to someone like BMW, productivity vastly improves. So again, some real, really great businesses in Yorkshire doing cutting edge stuff.
Hi guys, I just want to jump in and talk about a specific area of automation which we often get involved in, which is the processing of supplier invoices, or accounts payable automation as it's also known. Most businesses have invoices that they get sent from their suppliers. Essentially what our solutions do is they read those invoices, they extract key information from them, like purchase order numbers, supplier codes or supplier names. We then use that information and match that up against digital records. So can we find a purchase order number? Can we find a goods received note for that product? If we can, then we can match it up, we can reconcile it, and we can automatically post that into your finance system. What makes us different is that we configure our solutions to be specific to your organisation. So we're not an out-the-box, plug it in and see what you get. We actually understand more about your processes, your organisation, your supplier base, and we configure the solution to meet those requirements. Hopefully that's enough to pique your interest. If it is, get in touch, let's have a chat.
So you mentioned earlier, Steve, around you hold 150 events a year. That sounds a busy year.
Yeah.
And obviously, what you want to do is go in and offer that value to your clients about, have you thought about this? This is what we're seeing. So apart from getting speakers in, how else do you find that, I guess, information, that IP, if you like, to add that value to your clients? Apart from getting people, experts in that, how are you doing that?
Well, I think any successful business, particularly in times of change, you do not want to be sticking your head in the sand. It's about being constantly curious. If I think of some of the most successful businesses, they're not the ones that sort of hunker down and they don't trust the banks or the accountants or the lawyers or IT consultants. You do get organisations like that. I think the ones that are successful tend to be open to talking to people, being curious. So you can do research, you can go to conferences. So not just Clarion, but conferences. I spent half my life listening to Radio 4. There's always something on there about some sort of change. So I think it's just being open and curious. Constantly thinking about what's happening in my market. Is that you might just pick up something? Is that a trigger for doing something different? Because I think in a time where there's so much change at the moment, the last thing you can do is to be closed-minded. You've got to be open and curious and thinking about how does that change impact my business model.
And I guess it's easier for smaller businesses to pivot, as you say, because they haven't got the legacy systems and the legacy culture and everything that comes with it. And it's a real opportunity for SMEs to get ahead.
I absolutely agree. And we're a fairly decent-sized firm, but we're far from being the biggest, law firm, and actually that ability, that agility, I guess, to very quickly move. The sort of the lines of permission, if you like, within our organisation can be a matter of minutes. Whereas I've worked in, some of the biggest professional service firms on the planet. To respond to change means you sometimes have to go through a whole cycle or series of permissions to do something. So you're absolutely right. I think if you're an entrepreneurial SME, then probably all the more reason to think about how do we outflank the kind of competition.
Yeah.
And so on one hand, I'm advocating being curious about the change dynamics in the market. The other thing you've always got to have an eye on is what is the competition doing? Can we be quicker to move on something? So we see organisations that will be one of thousands in a very mature market, but we also see organisations where the competitive dynamic is just not there. There might be only 2 or 3 organisations that do what they do. So again, it's understanding change, but also what does my competitive dynamic look like? And sometimes the competition can be something unexpected. I mean, you think about if you were a restaurant owner 10 years ago in Hull or Leeds, you might think about a threat to your business being another restaurant being opened up down the road. Well, actually, the biggest threat to restaurants is being technology companies, Just Eats and the like, delivery. Yeah, so I think any organisation needs to be thinking, how could tech either benefit my business, or what is the threat? How could it disrupt my business model?
Yeah. So talk about tech then. So when you're out speaking to businesses, what are the technology trends specifically? You talked about 3D printing, but are there any, and you talked about data as well actually, so you've touched on some of this, but are there any other trends around technology that you're coming across?
I think it tends to apply to certain sectors, so going back to one of my favourite subjects is space and satellites. You can see how organisations are doing something quite unusual there. So in a time where we've got increasing climate change, either droughts or flooding. If you're a farmer, then you need to work out how to deal with that. So actually, if we've got bans on using hose pipes, and you've got to use your water sort of sparingly as a farmer, if you can use satellite technology to kind of look at where your field is dry and needs to be watered, or where you need to apply soil conditions or fertilizers. So again, we're seeing increasingly organizations doing that, or using AI combine harvesters. So all of that is coming. You think, well, why is that? So I guess part of what we historically, 2 or 3 years ago, we'd had a lot of labour coming in from Eastern Europe, and then combination of COVID and Brexit, we don't have that. So if you're a farmer, where do you get the labour? Well, if you can't, then increasingly you'll have to look to automation, and so we're seeing sort of trends around that.
I saw that actually in terms of like it could map the field and then efficiently map out which route to get the biggest yield.
Yeah,
like right down to the edge, and to the nth degree. They also knew that depending on where the farmer was and depending whether he made the bill payments, he could actually switch the combine off. They could actually turn it off, which I thought was quite amusing. But the yield, because again, I know when we've met before, we've talked about data quite a lot, and again, there's quite a big data sort of hub in Leeds. That's something that you advise your customers on. It's one of the value added pieces when you go in and out in conversations. It's actually, because I know you've got a big database of again companies, sectors like you mentioned there, who's in growth, who's in decline. You can actually make data driven decisions. But
so I guess whilst big focus for me is driving Clarion's strategy, and we've had over a decade of double digit growth. I think we've just come out as the third fastest growing law firm in Europe. So we use data very effectively to drive our own strategy, but also I'm passionate about this region, and so a lot of what we do is trying to help our clients and our friends to be successful. So we use our data and our expertise around driving growth to help our clients. I'm a strong believer that rising tide brings all boats home. So if we can help companies in Yorkshire to be proportionally more successful, then the region thrives. We improve GDP and all that goes with that. So we don't charge for that. It's something that we see it as a way of putting something back into the local region. We want companies in this region to be successful, particularly those that are doing something kind of exciting, that have got the ability to scale and to be world class. And we've certainly got plenty of those, particularly in the tech sector. So
sometimes asking those questions, like you say, until you've got someone like yourself coming in, sitting around a table, having those strategic type conversations, asking those pivotal questions, and then seeing if the data backs up the gut feeling of, because an MD might go, oh yeah, we've done this for years, or I see this trend, but then might have a look at the data and be like, well, actually, have you seen it from this angle?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, wow, okay. And then again, allows people to pivot again.
Sorry, Steve, that was the question I was going to ask, is actually, obviously you've mentioned data a lot through this pod. What I'm interested in is, on the back of what Neil was saying, is when you go in and have those conversations, what's the sort of feedback you get initially? Because when we go and talk to people about data, it's kind of like, well, I know what's going on in my business, and then when you actually start saying, well, actually, if you've got some more insight into your data, you might find some gaps. That then means actually you're missing a trick, because actually if you filled those gaps in, maybe better data population in at the start, data entry, you get improved results. So when you go into businesses and you're saying, look, data's the new currency, that's how you're going to be able to grow your business double digit for however many years, how's that received, and what do you have to do to convince people? Obviously you've got lots of evidence by the sounds of it, but how's that received?
I think it's taking the data, but also bringing commercial pragmatism to how you can use the data to get a positive outcome from the business. So, often you'll see an organisation. I'll often ask a company, who are your top 10 customers? And I remember doing this for a manufacturing business a year or two ago, and their clients were the likes of Siemens and Rolls-Royce, and that sort of British aerospace. And actually, when you kind of looked at the revenue that they had from those organisations, it was relatively modest. And I guess what they didn't know was actually within some of those global organisations, they were just working with one subsidiary of, say, Rolls-Royce or Honeywell was, I think, was a particular example. That we're working with one division of Honeywell. When we analysed Honeywell globally, there were 2,000 divisions in Honeywell that they didn't know about, one of which was based literally 10 miles down the road, and they didn't know about. And so when we looked at the website of this division of Honeywell down the road, the point was we should be working for them. And so I made the point, it's a well-known fact, that it's something between 6 to 10 times easier to cross-sell to an existing satisfied customer than to go and get a new customer. Yeah. So my very, very simple advice was, look, we'll analyse your top 10 customers in the same way and just maximise your exposure to those organisations. This was a business that had flatlined for 6 years, and after we had done the analysis and said just focus on cross-selling to your customers, I went back to visit them a year later. They'd grown by 20% by just being really focused on their existing client base. Another example would be an organisation whose business model has been disrupted. They've spotted it was going to be disrupted a year or two ago. So they make components for the automotive sector, and so their components would only be used on a conventional petrol or diesel engine. And clearly the disruption there is the emerging EV market. So they can see it's not going to change overnight, but it's a slow slide in terms of their market there. So they wanted something to replace that. And so they've come up with a new product, completely different kind of sector. And so the new product is applicable to the whole of the UK manufacturing sector. Whereas historically, all they had to do was keep 6 automotive OEMs happy, and the work just kept coming in. Yeah. So it was like an inbound sort of kind of market for them. Actually, now they were having to take their new product out into the market, into the manufacturing sector. So we were able to analyse the whole of the UK manufacturing sector and say, look, this is what it looks like. But then actually let's have some further segmentation there. Let's just focus on where your product is going to really resonate, which would be the kind of the 5 to 50 million pound market. So we segmented down to there. And so we say, well, actually, you're based in Yorkshire. Let's start with just Yorkshire. In fact, let's just focus on the town that you're in. So we got it right down from thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies, down to a small number of organisations that we could absolutely focus on. And then we said, well, look, we'll help you. We'll bring those companies together in a round table and talk about how your product could add value to their business models and what their product could do in terms of improving the resilience of those organisations. So I guess companies, if you just give them with a load of data, say, there you go, it doesn't add much value. What we're doing is giving the data and then underpinning with some really practical advice as to how you can commercialise it.
So you set up a round table then, more of a bit of a thought leadership, bit of a warmer in then, I guess, as a conversation around R&D and a bit more around, because that makes sense. It's easier than just knocking on the door. Not easier, but it's a different angle than just knocking on the door and going straight for the jugular and sort of asking the question. But you can have more of a intellectual conversation about, okay, if we did develop this product, or would you find this of service, or
and it's you'll know that sort of consultative approach that the worst salespeople that they've got their product, they knock on the door, say, do you want some of this? The consultative selling is about understanding what is the real issue, what's the pain that organisation or that individual is facing, and creating a vision with them as to how you can help them to get to where they need to be, but to link it to value, to say, look, if we can achieve this, and solve that problem for you, what is the value that our solution can create for you? And value for me comes down to this solution will help you to reduce costs or enhance revenue or create resilience or create competitive advantage. If you can quantify that, then they're more likely to move with you. Nothing worse than that sort of kind of cold selling sort of approaches there.
You talk about Clarion in the top 3 growth solicitors within Europe, which is phenomenal. What do you put that growth down to? What are the key things that you as an organisation have done over the last few years which have led to that growth? Because it was the envy of many businesses, I'm sure.
Well, I think there's a famous saying from some Harvard business guru that said that culture eats strategy for breakfast every morning, but it's leadership that puts the food on the table. and as a strategy person, that's a bit of a bitter pill to swallow. But I think the real answer is you need those three things, and this is what I think eludes a lot of organisations. You need really strong leadership. It's leadership that says, actually, you hear a lot of organisations, particularly when there's perhaps a rough time in the economy, might say, we're going to hunker down, we're going to batter down the hatches, we'll just stay as we are. I think real leadership says, well, actually, times of change is an opportunity. We're still going to grow by 10, 15, 20%, which is historically what we've done as an organisation. And so is that sense of we're going to keep going for it. Because once you've made that decision, you can't achieve a 20% growth by just keeping everything else the same. It drives your recruitment strategy. So once we've committed to 20% growth, it means we're going to have to recruit another 50, 60, 70 people, and all that goes with that. That means there's an impact on our spend on IT, because they'll all need laptops, they'll all need desks. So you've got to be really clear that your growth strategy is underpinned by a proper strategy, but the decisions therefore follow. And then in terms of culture, I think for me, culture is so important. It can be quite subjective. So again, for the last 2 years, there's only times best companies to work for. 2 years ago, we were ranked second across all sectors, all sizes, and this year we've managed to hold that position. On one hand, I think we're achieving the growth, but also we're keeping that culture, and you've got to work at it. And particularly as you get bigger and bigger, you've got to constantly think about how do we make this a really exciting and a great place to work. So we place great store in our culture. So I've talked about leadership, kind of we're going to go for it again, the culture, and I think the third final bit is the strategy piece, which is around knowing what we've talked about already, knowing what that change looks like, projecting forward as to how it impacts us, and then we're only successful as long as we're working with clients that are doing okay. So it goes back to how do we help our clients to succeed, and if we're working with clients that succeed, then and we support them with our legal services, and we'll continue to grow. So for me, it is taking that complete ecosystem approach to the economy. It's not just about Clarion being successful in its own right. It's how do we support the whole ecosystem to be successful. So we spend a lot of time, for example, in an economy that is still largely skills constrained. So there are very few sectors where they don't have a skills problem. And what we're trying to do is to make that link between the private sector and academia. So we're plugged into all the universities and the colleges and the schools, and we're trying to get the schools to understand the needs of the private sector. So to give you a very specific example, linked back to the satellite initiative, within the satellite cluster there is a subcluster called RF, radio frequency, and when you look at it's a real niche area, and historically RF capability in this region came out of the University of Leeds, and there were businesses like Filtronic that were very much the forerunners of understanding that, and actually from that other companies have spawned from Filtronic and elsewhere. So we've got a cluster of maybe 40, 50 RF companies. Doesn't sound very big, but when you look at the whole of the UK, it's probably the leading RF cluster in the UK, if not Europe. And I'm throwing it out there and hoping it sticks. Yorkshire's got the biggest RF cluster in Europe. And why is that important? Because RF underpins Internet of Things, satellite technology, telco. So if you talk to the defence primes and you look at where their gap is in their supply chain, it's RF. If you talk to the telecommunications primes, OEMs, whatever you want to call them, and ask them where their gap is in terms of competencies, it's RF. And other sectors. So you think, well, hang on, we've got a leading capability in RF here in Yorkshire. It's a growing market. We should be putting more into, and it's a value adding type of work. These are great complex businesses that are in RF. Well, we want to grow that surely, but to do that, we need to be convincing kids when they're going to school, primary school, secondary school, university, that they should have a career in RF. It's a difficult subject, but you can get a great salary if you go into it. So for me, it's about how do you get that strategic alignment from a regional perspective. We're saying this is one of our big bets in RF. then we need to reverse that back into the kids and inspire them to get involved in this. And particularly, I think kids that are very attuned to climate change and and kind of the planet and their own personal carbon footprint. Well, actually, you can inspire them to say that these satellites up there, some of what they can do is to monitor the climate. They can look at the melting of ice caps, so they can look at forest degradation in Brazil. So satellites can be used to create huge positivity. But if you want that, then you might want to consider a career in RF and make a difference.
That's really because on a number of podcasts we've had discussions around the education system, and we're doing the same subjects and the same sort of core strategies, if you like, for decades, and actually our children are going to have probably different requirements, and employers are going to have different requirements in 10-15 years time than they do now or 10 years ago. And so for me that's really exciting to hear that actually you or some of your clients are going into schools to actually educate, start thinking about these careers, because it's different to what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So that's exciting to him. My son's just started secondary school, so he's just at that stage where he's starting to think about what should he be, what subject should he be taking, to then what degree should he take, etc. So there
was some I can't remember the exact stat or quote, but they're saying something like that 50% of the jobs that we want in say 10-15 years in the future don't even exist yet. So it's a real challenge for kids to think. So for me, it's about kids being creating their own resilience in their career. They think about having the skills and the personal skill sets to be agile, so that you won't have a job for life. You might have 10-15 jobs for life, and it's thinking how do you achieve that. So it's inspiring kids to be constantly curious, I think, but also to be constantly reskilling themselves. That you don't stop learning what you need to do to your job by you in your mid-20s, and then you just carry on. I think you're going to have to constantly reinvent yourself.
And be strategic.
And be strategic.
In the same way that businesses are, it's picking the areas, the technologies, the competencies that are going to be successful in the future. That's exactly what you're doing. The podcast is called Tomorrow's Workplace Today. So we like to look forward at the workplace of tomorrow, if you like. So if you cast your mind forward 10 years, what do you think the workplace looks like in a sense that's different from today?
Crikey, that's some difficult questions.
We didn't give Steve a heads up.
We never give anybody the heads up with this question, and everybody looks like that.
I'll have a go. Well, actually, COVID, the last two and a half years has been a good rehearsal, hasn't it?
It has.
Who'd have thought that we'd have spending so much time at home. I suspect that we'll still be working in a hybrid fashion. So I think over the last 2.5 years we've absolutely adopted that at Clarion. We probably have 50% of our people on any particular day. People think about what they need to come in for, and that sense of presenteeism that might have been pervasive in the UK, I think, has gone now. There's no shame in saying, right, I'm working from home today. I think for us, the drivers for people to come in, particularly with our younger lawyers, is they like the social experience. They're coming in to meet their kind of peers. They're coming in for that informal on-the-job training. So they're listening to a conversation with a senior person, and they're picking up. It's not stuff from a textbook, but they're thinking, oh, that's how you approach that particular thing. So I think there's an element of that, and I think also you'll see people coming in for not to do the run-of-the-mill stuff. If you're just in the legal sector just going through some files for the day, well, you may as well do that at home. But if you're problem solving and you require other people's input, it's that co-creation of something, then that's, for me, that's the time when you should be coming into the office, is to get that sparking off each other and mutual problem solving. To a degree, you can do that on Teams or Zoom, but I think that just personal, being in a space together, it's a different experience. So I think balanced with that, we were half joking that some people will want to come in more because they don't want to turn the heating on. They can come into a nice warm office. So that might also be a driver for change. But I think going to tech is I think one of the big things we'll see in the future is more collaboration. I think that's one of the big things is how do you collaborate with other organisations in the supply chain to solve a particular problem. If you're going to do that across the whole of the UK or even internationally, if you're going to take the best of experience, then you might have to draw on expertise internationally. Then IT as a platform is a brilliant thing to facilitate that. Collaborative software that allows people to work together efficiently, I think, will be an important thing in the future.
And last question, just about the legal sector, actually, because I always have a perception of the legal sector that it's still very traditional. Lots of documents moving around, and is that still the case? Is it a sector that is digitising, or technology, is that coming to the forefront in the legal sector?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you two have looked at the amount of paper that we printed off in Clarion, I mean, I shouldn't say, but it been quite substantial. And you walk around the office now, there's very little paper. Our print has reduced quite a bit. So the behaviours have changed, and that's probably a positive thing from a planetary perspective. But actually, a lot of our stuff is now digitised. So if it's being digitised, you've got to have the ability to kind of search on stuff and find things efficiently. So we've invested huge amounts in our IT platforms. I think we'll increasingly see in the legal sector machine learning, AI, to create further efficiencies. If you've got huge bundles of documents where you're looking for kind of key trigger words, the ability to do that, I think, will be important, which creates efficiencies for our clients' experience. I think looking at another aspect of IT would be a well-run, ambitious organisation is going to invest in its ERP systems or CRM systems. So you've got to be, if you're an ambitious entrepreneurial firm, you need to understand who your customers are, what conversations you've got, what does your opportunity pipeline look like. And so, again, we've invested heavily in that. So it's only going to go one way. So actually, the thing that will differentiate, I think, the law firm of the future is clients will just expect you to be able to do the law. What it will be about the broader client experience. What are you doing to help me to grow my business? And so that's where I think Clarion perhaps is a bit of a forerunner. We really absolutely get that. It's not about us, it's about you as an organisation. How can we give you a great experience in terms of the law that we're doing for you, but how do we add value to your business through our insights and through our connectivity and our networks? We'll do that day in, day out. There's I could give you hundreds of examples where we've tried to help clients to be more successful.
And I think on that note, we'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Really
Steve.
enjoyed
Really
that.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
for some great questions.
Cut.